All right, shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome once again to another video review with your Akazaki Yahoo. As always, I'm giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahweh, Bashem, Hamashiach, Wamalak, Yahweh Shai, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa, baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation under the Most High Power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. All praises to the Almighty Yah. Hallelujah. Welcome one, welcome all. Again, this is another video review with your Akazaki Yahoo. And right now, we're going to get into the video of the 20 terrifying facts about slavery you should never forget. This is brought to us by our good brothers over at Black Stories Untold. All praises to the Most High. Link, as always, in the description box. Feel free to take a look at it over there, whatever the case. But nonetheless, we're going to review this video, take a look at the information, and we're going to talk about it. So here we go.
From the transatlantic trade to the horrific forced breeding that occurred on American plantations, the system of slavery is a sin that some want to forget and a truth that we must refuse to let die. Did you know that many slaves were separated from their families explicitly to be used as breeding guinea pigs? Or that doctors performed horrific surgeries on enslaved women without anesthesia? What about the fact that even after slavery was abolished, a loophole allowed Black people to be arrested for no reason? Does any of this sound surprising to you? Well, it shouldn't. This is America after all, the land of the chained and the home of the racist. But someone needs to tell the facts that have been conveniently erased from our education. In this video, we're exposing 20 facts about slavery that are going to show just how much America has been hiding from us. Give this video a like to show your support and subscribe so you can always be part of our movement. With that, let's begin. In 1808, when the international slave trade was banned, a new horrific practice emerged from the American slave trade. Unable to import new enslaved people, slave owners turned to something more monstrous, forcing Black women to produce children like livestock. This was done in order to maintain slave populations at the time, as importing slaves had been the traditional method of increasing one's population when older pieces of property would die off due to starvation and abuse. This calculated breeding program treated women's bodies as machines. Owners would examine women like cattle at auction, checking their hips, breasts, and teeth to determine their reproductive potential. Men were selected for strength and size, then forced to impregnate multiple women against their will. This horrific breeding system ensured the strongest of offspring would be raised, serving the master of the plantation when they came of age. In fact, slave breeding was so crucial to the slave economy of the South that a woman of childbearing age was worth nearly twice as much compared to a male slave. As historian Richard Such documented, by 1860, on plantations with at least one woman, the ratio of women to men exceeded 2 to 1. In the selling states, this imbalance was even more extreme: 300 women for every 1,000 men. This practice would continue well into the 19th century, officially ending with the abolishment of chattel slavery in 1865. But the damage of centuries of horrific breeding programs had already been done. But the dehumanization of Black bodies didn't stop at forced breeding. It extended into the respected halls of medicine, where Black women's pain was dismissed as insignificant. Celebrated as the father of modern gynecology, Dr. J. Marion Sims conducted brutal experiments on enslaved women between 1845 and 1849 without consent. A young woman named Lucy endured an hour-long surgery naked on all fours. Sims later wrote, "Lucy's agony was extreme. I thought that she was going to die." Anarcha suffered around 30 operations without anesthesia, which Sims withheld, believing Black women felt less pain, a common, harmful stereotype. These women were even forced to restrain each other during the agonizing procedures. Their suffering became gynecology's foundation. The medical establishment did more than just torture Black bodies, though. They even weaponized mental health to keep people in slavery. In 1851, Southern physician Samuel Cartwright created an official-sounding diagnosis that said, if you wanted to be free and happened to be black, you had a mental illness. He called it drapetomania. According to his twisted logic, this supposed disease caused enslaved people to flee from their masters. So what was the cause of this disease? Masters who treated enslaved people too kindly or allowed them too much equality. His recommended treatments included whipping to prevent and cure them from running away. What a complete load of BS. Can you believe this came from someone who was respected in the medical community? Cartwright's ideas were even published in popular medical journals at the time, bringing more credibility to his racist claims. He even created another fake condition called dysesthesia ethiopica that supposedly made enslaved people lazy. Both diagnoses served the same purpose, turning resistance into illness and brutal punishment as a cure for wanting to be free. While Northern publications mocked these theories, Southern doctors embraced them, creating an entire framework of medical justification for continued enslavement and torture. Imagine searing hot iron pressed against your skin, marking you like an animal. That's what enslaved people faced. Slave owners burned their initials or symbols onto chests, faces, or shoulders. These scars were permanent reminders that they were seen as nothing more than property. It was a cruel way to identify ownership and punish anyone who dared dream of freedom. If somehow you did escape, packs of specially trained dogs were sent after you. These weren't just any dogs. They were vicious hunters, often bloodhounds mixed with bulldogs, bred specifically to track down human beings. Newspapers back then openly advertised rewards for branded runaways and dogs skilled at catching Negroes. Think about that. It was completely normal. This constant threat of being marked like cattle and hunted down like prey created overwhelming fear. It was all designed to break their spirit and keep them enslaved, trapped in a cycle of terror. Imagine laws designed not just to control you, but to erase your humanity completely. That's exactly what slave codes did. These were comprehensive legal systems crafted and enforced by colonial and state governments designed to turn human beings into property. One of the most insidious weapons of these codes was the deliberate suppression of education. In places like Missouri and Virginia, it was illegal for enslaved people to learn to read or write. White individuals caught teaching enslaved people faced severe punishments. Fines up to $1,000, jail time, and in some southern states, even the threat of death. Frederick Douglass himself famously noted that learning to read was the first step toward his liberation, which is why enslavers worked so hard to keep literacy out of reach. The slave codes also attacked the very core of family life. Enslaved people couldn't legally marry, which meant families had no protection under the law. A husband could be sold away from his wife, children from their mothers. Perhaps one of the most devastating elements of these laws was the principle of partus sequitur ventrum, a phrase meaning that if the mother was enslaved, her child was automatically born into slavery, even if the father was a free white man. This ensured the perpetual growth of the enslaved population and locked entire generations into bondage. Control over enslaved people wasn't limited to their bodies, it extended to their very souls. Slave owners, fearing that the powerful biblical stories of liberation might inspire rebellion, created a heavily edited Bible titled Parts of the Holy Bible, selected for the use of the Negro slaves. Approximately 90% of the Old Testament and half of the New Testament were stripped away. The entire story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage was erased. Passages that spoke of freedom, justice, and equality were systematically removed. Even verses like Galatians 3:28, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus," were eliminated. Instead, what remained were verses like Ephesians 6:5. "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling." These carefully selected scriptures were designed to justify enslavement and demand obedience, using religion as a tool of subjugation. But the manipulation of religious texts went far beyond simply removing threatening passages. Slaveholders constructed an entire theological system to convince themselves they were doing God's work. This perversion of Christianity transformed Jesus from a liberator into a divine enforcer of racial hierarchy. But the control of the enslaved extended far beyond twisted scriptures and into their physical living spaces. Slave cabins were intentionally designed to break both body and spirit. Imagine being crammed into a 10 by 12-foot shack with 14 other people, sleeping on a straw pallet atop a dirt floor that turned to mud whenever it rained. The thin, drafty walls were little more than wooden planks, with gaps wide enough for biting insects, snakes, and the chill of winter to slip through. Enslaved families were deprived of even the most basic comforts. There were no beds, no chairs, no place to safely store what few belongings they had. The complete absence of sanitation facilities forced people to use communal pits or the surrounding woods, directly contributing to diseases like dysentery, cholera, and respiratory infections. In many cases, enslaved individuals lived right next to livestock, further increasing the spread of disease. On plantations like Boone Hall in South Carolina, where rows of brick slave cabins still stand today, these conditions were just as bad. While brick may seem like an upgrade, low ceilings, cramped quarters, and a single small window ensured minimal airflow and light. This entire system was designed to strip away human dignity, one day at a time, until hope was completely destroyed. But before they were crammed into those suffocating cabins, before they were forced to live like cattle on plantations, they endured something even more nightmarish: the journey across the Atlantic. While many are familiar with the Middle Passage, the journey slaves took to go from Africa to the New World, very few are aware of the extent of its horror. While over 12.5 million Africans were stolen and forced onto ships, over 2 million of them never saw land again, perishing on the trip. Almost 2 million souls swallowed by the ocean, more people than live in cities like Philadelphia today. On average, 15% died each trip, but oftentimes over half the human cargo perished from rampant disease, starvation, dehydration, or murder by the crew. They were crammed tighter than bodies in coffins, each person trapped in roughly 4 square feet of space, chained in darkness for months on end. Even women and children weren't spared this torture. Enslaved pregnant mothers often would have to give birth in these conditions, with newborns becoming stillborns as they couldn't handle the horrific conditions at sea. And a crying baby? It might be tossed overboard like unwanted garbage just to silence it. Perhaps the most chilling example of human commodification in history occurred in 1781, when the British slave ship Zong departed from Ghana with 442 enslaved Africans, double its intended capacity. When the journey took longer than expected and the crew ran low on drinking water, 132 living, breathing human beings were thrown overboard, never to be seen again. The ship's owners didn't even try to hide this atrocity. They instead filed an insurance claim for these human beings as damaged cargo. When the case reached court, the debate centered entirely around insurance technicalities, not the mass murder of hundreds of Africans that had just occurred. Because of the legal dispute, reports of the massacre received increased publicity and eventually helped lead to the establishment of the Slave Trade Act of 1788 in Great Britain, which helped to regulate the human slave trade. You might think the laws banning the international slave trade in the early 1800s stopped the nightmare, but the sad truth is, it just drove the horror underground, making it even worse. Between 1.65 million and 2 million more Africans were stolen and forced across the Atlantic after it was illegal. Slavers used faster ships and more ruthless tactics to dodge patrols. Even after the U.S. made the trade a capital offense in 1820, American ships remained central to the illegal network. Immense profits outweighed risks, fueling this engine of misery. Conditions for captured Africans grew more hellish. Packed tighter into faster ships, they faced terror, being thrown overboard to destroy evidence if patrols neared. Rampant corruption enabled this. Officials from Cuba to the U.S. took bribes to ignore the human cargo. But the spirit of enslaved Africans refused to be broken, even during the nightmare of the Middle Passage. Their constant fight for freedom often gets erased when history paints them only as victims. Imagine the chaos and desperation aboard those ships as captives fought back, their homeland sometimes still visible. Historians figure rebellions happened on about 1 in 10 voyages, often near the African coast where hope remained strongest. Even knowing the brutal consequences of failure, torture, or death, enslaved Africans chose to risk everything. They fought for their lives and freedom with profound bravery. A powerful example is the Amistad Rebellion in 1839. Led by Sengbe Pie, captives took control, killing the captain and cook who had tortured them. The frequency of such revolts forced traders to build ships like floating prisons, with barriers, armed guards constantly watching, separating captives by language, and keeping men chained below deck. Their resistance persisted despite these measures. While British naval forces battled the illegal Atlantic slave trade, a far older and equally devastating system of human trafficking was flourishing across the scorching sands of the Sahara. This often overlooked chapter of history, known as the Trans-Saharan slave trade, lasted not for decades but for over 13 centuries, claiming millions of African lives. Connecting sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa and the Middle East, caravan routes moved enslaved Africans, primarily women and children destined for domestic servitude and concubinage. Estimates suggest 8 to 17 million were taken. The journey across the Sahara, lasting up to 3 months, was itself a form of torture, the desert's hostility mirroring the cruelty of their bondage. Ibn Battuta documented caravans where captives, often chained, faced extreme heat, dehydration, and starvation. Water was scarce. Those who faltered were left to die. While abolition occurred in the West during the 19th century, this trade persisted much longer elsewhere. Now, let's talk about a really tough part of this history: the role some African leaders and merchants played in the transatlantic slave trade. It wasn't as simple as Europeans showing up and taking people by force. Some African elites were deeply involved, capturing and selling fellow Africans in exchange for European goods. African kingdoms like the Kingdom of Congo developed sophisticated trading networks that supplied captives to European traders along the West African coast. But as the European demand for enslaved labor grew, so did the scale of violence. Some African rulers expanded warfare, raiding neighboring communities, and even initiating conflicts explicitly to capture more people for sale. The Kingdom of Dahomey, for instance, became infamous for its annual slave raids into neighboring regions. In exchange for human lives, African traders received textiles, metal goods, rum, and most notably, firearms and gunpowder. These weapons allowed for more raids and wars, leading to more captives, which in turn could be traded for even more weapons. The Oyo Empire, for example, used its cavalry and military prowess to dominate neighboring peoples and feed the slave markets along the coast. However, it's essential to place African involvement within a broader global context. The transatlantic slave trade was built on European demand and infrastructure. European powers provided the ships, the markets, and the insatiable appetite for human labor to fuel plantations in the Americas. The plantation economies of Brazil, the Caribbean, and the American South created the vast need for enslaved labor that drove the trade. Europeans also supplied the firearms and goods that corrupted local African politics and economics, encouraging the expansion of slavery and warfare within African societies. When we think of fighting slavery, we often picture daring escapes, but enslaved women fought back in quieter, powerful ways that history books barely mention. Enslaved women, facing the cruel reality of forced breeding, oftentimes used African knowledge of herbs and roots like silphium, cotton root bark, and tansy, using them as contraceptives. This was an act of rebellion against the machinery of slavery that sought to turn their wombs into tools of profit. One powerful story comes from an enslaved healer named Rachel, documented in oral histories from South Carolina. Rachel was well known for her skill with herbal medicines. Women came to her in secret, seeking relief not only from physical pain but from the terror of enforced pregnancies. Rachel provided them with concoctions to prevent or end their pregnancies, striking a blow against the masters who sought to multiply their human property to make a profit. But these women's resistance didn't end there. Many enslaved cooks and chefs were able to use their position to strike back against their masters. Documented accounts from plantations in Virginia and Louisiana describe women who would slip crushed glass, arsenic, or toxic herbs into the meals of particularly brutal overseers or owners. Most people don't realize that even before the Civil War, free Black Americans built lives in the North and South, but by 1860, almost 500,000 lived free, creating communities in cities like Philadelphia, New York, and New Orleans. They had their own churches, schools, and businesses, with places such as Boston's Beacon Hill standing as symbols of Black excellence. But freedom for Black Americans was never truly free. Many states made them register and carry freedom papers constantly. Being caught without these papers could mean being kidnapped and sold back into the nightmare of slavery. Despite this ever-present danger, they established their own banks, insurance companies, and mutual aid societies because white institutions often refused to serve them. One historical example of these thriving communities is the Treme neighborhood in New Orleans. Treme became one of the first free Black neighborhoods in the United States, known for its vibrant cultural life and resistance against racial oppression. Here, free Black residents owned property, formed social aid societies, and contributed to the city's cultural and political life. Yet even these successes were often met with violent backlash. The 1829 Cincinnati riots forced hundreds of Black residents from their homes, and later, the 1863 New York City draft riots targeted Black communities in retaliation for the Emancipation Proclamation. But the suppression of enslaved people didn't stop at physical chains. Even their souls were policed, with unauthorized worship punishable by terrible violence. Yet in the darkness of night, they built a sacred world their enslavers couldn't touch, so-called hush harbors, where African traditions merged with Christianity. These secret meetings served as places where people could speak freely, share vital information, and plan escapes. Within these hidden communities, some religious leaders memorized biblical passages by heart, developing distinctive preaching styles characterized by call and response patterns that would become foundational to Black church traditions. One notable example comes from the Stono River area in South Carolina, where enslaved Africans, primarily from the Congo region, held clandestine religious ceremonies blending Catholic rituals with African spiritual practices. These gatherings, which sometimes incorporated drumming, singing, and dancing, connected the enslaved to their cultural roots and affirmed their shared humanity. This spiritual fusion helped spark the Stono Rebellion of 1739, the largest slave uprising in the British colonies before the American Revolution. Hush harbors, whether in swamps, woods, or back rooms, were places where the enslaved reclaimed their dignity and forged the spiritual backbone that would sustain generations. While some fought the system of slavery from within, others escaped to build entirely new lives, hidden away from their enslavers. Deep in swamps and mountains, escaped enslaved people created secret communities called maroon communities. The Great Dismal Swamp, sitting between Virginia and North Carolina, was one of the biggest maroon communities. Thousands might have lived there in hidden villages. These communities also served as bases for fighting back against oppressors. People would raid plantations to free others or get supplies. They even knew how to trick slave catchers with false trails and lookouts. These communities helped prove that enslaved people could be free and successful on their own. Sadly, some historians focus more on white help in the Underground Railroad, maybe because it's hard to admit how strong Black resistance really was on its own. But the Great Dismal Swamp wasn't the only place where Black people rewrote the rules of survival. Did you know that some Native American tribes, like the Seminoles in Florida, didn't just help escaped slaves, they welcomed them as equals, forging powerful alliances that defied the racial hierarchies of American society? These escaped slaves, many of whom were descendants of Gullah people from plantations in South Carolina and Georgia, found refuge in the wilds of Spanish Florida, where the reach of American slave laws was limited. There, they built their own villages, cultivated crops, and intermarried with the Seminoles, creating a unique blended society. These individuals became known as the Black Seminoles. They shared a common enemy with the Native Americans, slave owners and settlers encroaching on their lands. Conflicts against white settlers, particularly the Second Seminole War, saw America deploy tens of thousands of soldiers in a desperate attempt to recapture the Black Seminoles who had escaped slavery. But the Black Seminoles' intimate knowledge of Florida's swamps and wilderness made them formidable guerrilla fighters, and their legacy continued for generations, even after they relocated to Oklahoma. This story of Black and Native people standing together against oppression is rarely told. It challenges the simplistic narratives of American history that often depict people of color as isolated victims rather than united resistors. Harriet Tubman, born enslaved in Maryland around 1822, became one of the most famous conductors on the Underground Railroad after escaping slavery herself. She wasn't just brave, she was also incredibly clever. To guide freedom seekers, she used secret codes hidden within spiritual songs, messages enslavers couldn't understand. Think about the spiritual wade in the water. For those listening carefully, it was a vital instruction. Get into the water to throw off the scent of tracking dogs. It was a signal to use the natural world to cover their tracks. Then there was Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Singing this could mean that escape plans were moving forward. The chariot represented the secret network of the Underground Railroad, ready to take people north to freedom. Tubman could even change the song's tempo to signal safety or warn of danger nearby. So why were these codes so successful? Because slave owners believed harmful racist ideas. They saw enslaved people as unable to think strategically or organize complex escapes. They heard the songs as simple religious expressions, completely missing the hidden instructions for liberation. This underestimation allowed Tubman to operate right under their noses. Her genius with these codes helped Harriet Tubman lead more than 70 enslaved people to freedom across roughly 13 dangerous missions. She famously never lost a single passenger, despite facing a huge $40,000 bounty for her capture. So, after the end of the Civil War, slavery was officially over, right? Ha! That's what America and their history books want you to think. You see, all the racists in the southern states found a sneaky way around the 13th Amendment. Can't have those newly freed Black people running around having a good time, can you? You see, the 13th Amendment banned slavery except as punishment for a crime. So what did Southern ex-plantation owners do? They created laws designed to make being Black a crime. Laws against being unemployed, called vagrancy laws, were used to arrest Black people just for walking around. Once arrested, they were leased out like property to private companies. They were forced to work in deadly mines, build railroads, or cut timber under horrific conditions. It was brutal, often worse than slavery itself. Think about it. A slave owner might want to keep their property alive for future work. But these companies, they had no reason to care. If a leased convict died from exhaustion or abuse, the company just got another one from the state. Death rates soared, sometimes reaching 25% a year in these camps. Why did this happen? Money. States like Alabama made huge profits. Nearly 73% of their entire state revenue in 1898 came from leasing Black bodies. It gave them every reason to arrest and convict as many Black men as possible. This legal slavery, this convict leasing, didn't end in 1865. It continued well into the 1900s, with Florida only stopping county convict leasing in 1923. It's a disgusting chapter conveniently left out of many history books, but one we want to make sure you're well aware about today. We always hear slavery was a Southern thing, but did you know northern cities got rich from it too? Places like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, a lot of their wealth was built on profits from the slave trade and goods made by enslaved people. Think about New York City. In the early 1700s, it was the second biggest slave market in the country, and it wasn't just individuals profiting. Big northern banks and insurance companies made fortunes by financing slave voyages and insuring slave ships and people. Companies like Aetna, still huge today, got their start by putting a dollar value on human lives, insuring them as property. Then you have the factories up north, those textile mills making cloth. They depended completely on cotton. Where did that cotton come from? From southern plantations, picked by enslaved hands under brutal conditions. So northern factory owners profited directly from slave labor, keeping their own hands clean while benefiting from the system. Even after northern states started banning slavery, their economies stayed tied to it. Well, that's all we have for you today. We hope you learned a lot today and encourage you to share this video with.
Yeah, kind. So, man, a lot to think about, a lot to process. You know, shout out to our ancestors who did wonderful at not just being held down, who actually fought back and did it with strategy, did it with cunningness, with the sleight of hand. Harriet Tubman, using those spirituals and, man, just phenomenal work, to accomplish what they were able to accomplish. It is, man, it's heavy. It's heavy, to think that this is where we came from, to think that we're the children of the survivors. In order for us to be here, people survived. Our people survived through all of these, the Middle Passage, the um, the Atlantic Ocean, made it on a ship, made it over, and got all the way to this place. Had to deal with all of that. Had to deal with all the negativity, with all the hard times, with all the, uh, all the treachery of the so-called white man, and yet we're still here. The children of those that made it. That's our praises to the Most High, because there's no other way we could have did what we've done. There's no way we could be here if it wasn't for Him. So all praise is always honor, glory, and all the esteem unto the Most High, who have kept us through all of these situations and circumstances. I like leaving pictures like that up. I want to remind us, these were our people. I don't know these people, but these are my people. These are my people. And, man, it's hard. It's hard to believe that this is what we had to endure. This was it. And there wasn't any strife between us. It was us. We was all we had. And that meant a lot to us because we had nothing. All praise to the Most High. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it on out here. And we'll get to the end here. We do this for a specific purpose. Why do we do it? Romans chapter 10 and verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Ha'abah for Israel is that they might be saved. We want to see our people saved. We want to see our people set free. We want to see our people restored to the prominence that the Most High had promised us. How are we going to do it? First of all, we're going to keep the faith and the belief in Hamashiach, the Messiah, to deliver us and to do all that the Most High have commanded for Him to do for Israel, His people. Number 2, Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important to understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled, and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged, or rather we have feared the Most High and kept His commandments. Why? Because this is the whole duty of man. I am your Akazaki Yahoo, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahweh Ba'ashem HaMashiach, Wa Malak Yahweh Shai, and to the 12 tribes of Israel, who were scattered to the 4 quarters of the earth. I say Shalom, Wa Baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Until that day come, shalom, family. All praises to the Most High. Praise you, Abba Yah, Kwam Yasha Allah, and Barak Hashem Yahweh.